You want to?
Is this the keyboard for that?
Oh, yeah.
We should be recording already.
You are. Click there.
Okay.
So I don't know
Okay. All right, Chairman, if you want to start, you can.
Can you just make it a little bit larger?
No, just kidding.
It's like, wow. We're recording it?
Yes.
Okay. Good morning. Welcome to today's Upper Rio Grande Float Planning Group meeting. Today is December 16th, 2021, and for the record, it is 9:05 a.m. Annette has mentioned that we met quorum and we're ready to begin. And so item number 2, recognition of guests. Is there anybody joining us today that has not been acknowledged by Annette? Hearing
Yes,
none.
hello. I'm sorry. This is Patricia Garcia with Barracuda PR.
Hi, Patricia. Thank you for joining us. Anybody else? Hearing none, we'll move on to item number 3, member updates. Does anybody have anything to share? With the exception of holidays, we're trying to end in 30 minutes. Okay. Hearing none, we'll move on to item number 4, public comments. Does any member of the public have anything that they'd like to talk to the group about? Hearing none, we'll move on to item number 5, and then I'll hand it over to Annette. These are her agenda items.
Thank you, Omar. So what you do have as part of the attachment with the agenda are the minutes from November 30th. If there are any items that need to be corrected, if you can let me know. If not, I would ask through the chair if anybody would consider making a motion to approve.
So moved.
First from Sal. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, second from Dave. The first and second, any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please indicate so by saying aye.
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 Yep. Any opposed?
Aye.
Okay, motion passes. Item number 5. I'm sorry, item number 6.
Yes, this next one is an update from Sarah to give us some information on Region 15. I don't believe that Sarah is on the call, so, oh, there you are, Sarah. Okay, thank you, Sarah.
Sorry, y'all. I don't have my camera on. I don't have a webcam on my desktop. But so yesterday at the Lower Rio Grande Valley RFPG, I was not able to attend, but I asked a colleague to go for me, and I'm going to send everyone written notes. Is that okay?
That'll work.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
Hey.
Okay, item number 7, RioCog and TWDB updates.
Yes, thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Richard so he can give us some updates from Water Development Board.
Hi, everyone. This is Richard Bagans from the Water Development Board. Just a few updates. So last meeting, you guys had approved the contract amendments for the additional funding. So we are processing those to move forward with AECOM and with Rio Grande COG. So that is being worked on currently. The tech memo is due January 7th, and the full RFPG needs to vote to approve to submit the tech memo to the TWDB. So that is an agenda item on today's meeting. So that is something that kind of needs to happen before the January 7th deadline. Terms of other updates, technical consultants, we are working on a more detailed email blast on how to submit the tech memo, and we'll send out access to the OneDrive so that you guys can submit it electronically. And let me check if there's anything else. Tech memo, additional funding. And, we also held 2 conference calls December 8th, one for technical consultants and one for chairs. So they're just discussing details of technical guidelines and clarification questions for the technical consultants conference call. That presentation portion is now posted to our website with the slides. If you guys wish to review that, some of the topics included clarifications on how projects get moved from FMS, FMP, and FMEs, emergency need definitions, unique IDs within the feature classes on files. Some regions have thousands of pages of existing infrastructure, and making sure not to include that in like the main portion of the tech memo, but it's fine to have that as an attachment because it's not as digestible. So things like that were discussed. And then at the chairs conference call, just general chairs discussing what's going on across the state. We plan to keep holding both of those conference calls quarterly. And we always invite the chair sponsors and technical consultants just to listen into those. And that is it. Just so you guys know what all the other regions are up to, there are 5 other region meetings going on today. So a lot of regions are having meetings this week and approving their tech memos. So everyone is on the same page as you all to get these votes in. One last update. Bylaws. I believe your guys' bylaws, you guys did adopt the model bylaws for this clause, but the officer elections in the bylaws state at the first meeting in the calendar year for 1-year terms. So just planning out for officer elections at your next meeting in the next year, or in January or February, whenever it next is. And that are all the updates for me. Does anybody have any questions for me at this time? And I'll pass it back to Annette.
Thank you. So we do, on the next agenda item, Chair, it's a discussion potential action on administrative expenses to be submitted to Texas Water Development Board. We do not have any to present at this moment, so we're not asking for any action.
So do we officially chair that for another meeting?
Table it?
Yes,
table
we'll
it, I
table
mean.
it. Yes, sir.
Chair it, table it.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, then item number 9, AECOM general updates.
All righty, thank you, Omar. Good morning, everybody. My name is Gilbert Andujo with AECOM, and today we're joined by Brian Blaisdell, Jeff Irvin, Alejandra Marco, and Chris Wright from AECOM, and we have our sub Patricia Garcia and Marina Monsiváis from Barracuda, in which we'll be tag teaming this presentation for you all. Next slide. We'll be discussing, general updates to the RFP on here, and then also we'll be covering the technical memo. We'll be having a discussion and adoption of it, as well as discussing the responses from TWDB to our levy questions. Next slide. So just to get you all up to date, we did submit the technical memorandum to the RFPG on December 3rd. And right now I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Patricia to go ahead and cover our roadshow meetings that we've got coming on. Patricia?
Good morning. So we have confirmed our dates and venues for our PECOS and Presidio meetings. PECOS will be at the Desacol Center on February 9th. And then the next day we will travel to Presidio and have our meeting there at the Presidio Activity Center on February 10th. Just so anybody knows, if you look up Presidio Activity Center, you'll find the Presidio Senior Center. So that's a little confusing, but it's all one big complex. So that is correct. We are preparing ads for Big Bend Sentinel and the Pecos Enterprise to make sure that we get our announcement enough time within the 30-day period that we need to do. And then we'll also be sending press releases for area media now that we have our dates confirmed. And then we are now emailing stakeholders just so we get everybody on board very quickly. That's what I've got.
Thank you, Patricia. We also held our subcommittee 2 meeting 4, in which we identified and evaluated a lot of the potential flood mitigation projects. And all of you are aware we had that on December 14th. So with that being said, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Chris.
All right, thank you, Gilbert. So I'm just going to go through some of the highlights from the Subcommittee 2 meeting that was held this last Tuesday, a couple days ago. We had 3 main goals for the meeting. The first was to refine our screening process for any FMPs that were not in the City of El Paso or El Paso County Stormwater Master Plans. We had sent out some spreadsheets in advance, which addressed some of the comments that came up in the previous Subcommittee 2 meeting, where they had asked us to compare the goals that we had agreed upon in Subcommittee 1 meetings to the criteria and categories that we were going to use to score the projects outside of the city of El Paso, County of El Paso master plans. So we had followed up on that with an email before the meeting, and then we kind of went through what those categories, what scores each one of them should receive. So we'll look at that here in this overview. We also went through a screening process for the projects that are in the City of El Paso Stormwater Master Plan and the County of El Paso Stormwater Master Plan. We had coordinated with the city and county before the meeting and came up with a process to kind of sort and winnow down the total number of projects in those master plans. So those were the goals for our meeting. One thing that we covered in the meeting as well was that there were some clarifications that we just wanted to talk about. An approach that we are considering is that, according to the guidelines from the TWDB Exhibit C associated with the master plan, associated with the regional flood plan, there is not necessarily a requirement to submit all of the data for all recommended projects. And so what we are considering, because the inclusion of projects in the regional flood plan will be a necessity if you are applying for funds through the state, is that we could include all of the projects from the city and county master plans as recommended projects, as recommended FMPs, but only go through the evaluation process for the highest priority projects. So that's this screening process that we talked about, to kind of prioritize what are the projects that they want us to evaluate, and the rest we can still keep in the regional flood plan, but they would just not have all the data that would be needed for TWDB to score them very highly. So they would receive zeros in certain scoring categories when compared to other projects throughout the state. So when TWDB goes through and ranks all of these projects, those ones where we didn't provide the additional data would score at the bottom of that list statewide. However, they would still be in the regional flood plan, so they wouldn't be excluded from funding opportunities that come out in the future. So that's our general approach that we're considering at this time. We have submitted some questions to Richard at TWDB, and we're pending a response on that. But that's kind of the approach that we're looking at right now. It doesn't sound like the order in which the projects are ranked by TWDB will necessarily affect whether or not they get funding. They'll be considered for funding, but it won't be dependent on that order, is our understanding based on some questions that came up during that subcommittee 2 meeting. Anything to add there, Richard? Thank you.
Nope, you got it.
Okay, and then this is just the general timeline that we thought was important to highlight in the subcommittee 2 meeting and in this meeting, just so you all can understand. In August, we're going to be submitting the draft regional flood plan, and in January of 2023, there will the final regional flood plan will be submitted to TWDB. So between August and January, we'll be getting comments from TWDB and incorporating those comments, and then the revised or final plan be submitted in January. However, there is still going to be an opportunity to amend that plan. The deadline to amend that plan is going to be September 2023. So between the time when we submit the draft in August and September 2023, we will have the opportunity to implement some of the FMEs or the studies that we're going to recommend in the plan. So some of the projects could move over from that FME category to the FMP category in that time frame when we're amending the plan. And then in October of 2023, immediately after the deadline to amend it, is when the second cycle of the RFP process begins. And then the date at which the first cycle is actually published is a year later, in September of 2024. So that is our understanding of the high-level milestone schedule items, and we just wanted to make sure that you all were aware of those as well. Next slide. So these are the scoring categories that we decided upon at the subcommittee 2 meeting. You can see in the yellow column on the left are the maximum points that we had come up with for each of these categories. As I mentioned earlier, we did cross check these against regional flood planning goals, and there were no suggested changes to these categories. So we proceeded with develop these scores, and then the range of scores that could be applied to each of these categories are in that next column to the right there. And then underneath the permitting table on the right hand side, you can see in yellow what points would be assigned for each of these permitting categories depending on their permit complexity, if it's required or not, and if it's difficult or if it's unknown. You have different levels of scoring subtractions or additions. And
Hey,
again,
Chris,
yeah.
hey, Chris, if this gets put into some document in the future, can you, on that slide, that previous slide, can you center those columns, those yellow columns, so everything is centered like the blue column?
Yes, they would be formatted. Sorry, yeah, I just took a screen capture from during our meeting, so they look a little bit rough. But yeah, we would format them, and we'll talk a little bit about that. You know, if we want to document them in this tech memo, we could have the opportunity to do that. But we'll get to that later in this presentation. But thank you. Any other questions so far? All right. So then, I know you all can't really see this very well, but it is a list of 25 projects that are from the City of El Paso or EP Water's Stormwater Master Plan from 2021. We start out with 96 projects, and through coordination with EP Water, we ranked and sorted these projects in different ways to come up with this reduced list of 25 projects that set the prioritization for evaluating projects in this regional flood plan. So this is what we had voted on in the meeting, and you'll see there were some clarifications or some exceptions that we pointed out during our voting process, and we'll go over those in a couple slides. Next. And this is similarly for El Paso County Stormwater Master Plan. We reduced it from 67 projects down to 19. Before the meeting, we had 20, but between the time we had sent out the email, which explained the process to get from 67 to 20, we got some news that the Flood Infrastructure Fund was considering this first project at the top of the list, SOC1, SOC2, is now being considered for funding. So we are proposing to cross that one off the list for evaluations or priority of evaluations because it's already being considered for funding. However, we still do need to clarify that the county is okay with that change. So that'll be covered in kind of our voting process and in the exceptions that we made in our vote. And so I think that's the next slide, if we can go on to that. Yeah, so these are the actions that we voted on at the end of the subcommittee 2 meeting. This first one has to do with the screening process for the projects outside the Stormwater Master Plan. Basically, we voted on approving the refinement of that screening process to include those scoring point totals that I showed you earlier, which we hadn't established at that previous to this meeting. And we also clarified that, AECOM will, once we have a look at all the projects that we're going to be evaluating, both inside and outside of El Paso County, we're going to have to see how much budget and time remains so that we might not still be able to do all of these. So we might have to reduce the list further. So that's what that clarification is at the end there of the number 1 voting action. Are there any questions about number 1 voting action at this time? Again, this is a refinement of the screening process for projects outside the El Paso County and Stormwater City of El Paso master plans. Now, the next one is for within the City of El Paso Stormwater Master Plan, which again had 26 projects. Had 96 projects. We winnowed that down to 25 potentially feasible FMPs, which we showed you the list earlier. However, we did have the exception where we're allowing EP Water to have an opportunity to submit a revised list before the next subcommittee 2 meeting. They wanted some more time to look through the projects. We've actually met with Isela recently on that since the meeting and talked through some of these projects. So we think we're on the right track to have that revised list at the next subcommittee meeting. We also, again, clarified that AECOM is going to have to look at the budget and time and see how many of these they can do. It will depend on the complexity and how difficult it is to set up these models for the type of evaluations that we need. So that's that second bullet there. Are there any questions regarding that adjustment? All right, and the last one is we selected 19 of the potentially feasible FMPs from the El Paso County Stormwater Master Plan. And we did also refine this screening process based on the meetings that we had with the county, similar to EP Water, where we reduced that list of 67 projects down to 19. And again, we gave the county the opportunity to submit a revised list before the next subcommittee 2 meeting. And AECOM the opportunity to reduce the list further based on the complexity and how much effort it takes to model. Any questions on that? All right. Well, with that, I will, I think, hand it to Annette, actually, before we move on from that slide. And if we want to vote now on this approval from you all, again, they approved it in the subcommittee 2 meeting, but we would like for the Regional Flood Planning Group to vote on it as well. Is that something we can have you lead, Annette?
Yes, so just to be sure that I understand, these actions are part of the tech memo. So that is the case. I think that when we approve the tech memo, that the person who makes the motion makes a statement that they include these 3 actions from the subcommittee to his recommendations. I do see that Gilbert has a question, and so does Sal. Chair.
Gilbert?
I'll wait for the question. Go ahead, Gilbert.
Yes, thank you. So, Chris, I wanted to ask if, on that SOC 1 and SOC 2 project for the county, is there, since it's not been official that we've received funding for that particular project, I think we're invited to proceed to the next phase. Is there something that we can do, like a caveat on it, to leave it pending until we get confirmation that the funding has been secured?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. It's not clear how long it might take to confirm whether it has actually been secured at this time. So, something we might propose doing is putting it at keeping it on the list of projects to potentially evaluate, but maybe moving it to the bottom of that list as a lower priority. And then, so that way, we can work through the higher priority ones, evaluating those. And then hopefully by the time we reach the point where we're just going to have to say we can't evaluate any new projects. Hopefully by that time, we'll know for sure about whether it's been approved for funding. If not, we'll have to make a decision at that time. But we're expecting that time period to be around March or April, where we're just going to have to say at this point we don't have time to take on any new project evaluations. We are going to continue to look at FMPs that can be added to this list, not the city and county stormwater master plans, but throughout the region in any other projects that could come up in El Paso. There's still opportunities to add projects to this list of projects to be evaluated, but around March or April, and we think that's consistent with other regions, around March or April, we're expecting to have to do a cutoff. So, but yeah, we can leave it on the list as a low priority.
Okay, appreciate that. And
to address what Isela said earlier about the tech memo edits, we do have some refinements to the tech memo that we were going to present here today that cover these 3 items and how we would incorporate them into the tech memo. So yeah, I don't see a problem with adding a caveat that these would be incorporated in the tech memo.
Hey,
So,
Chris,
Annette-
it's Dave. Oh, go
Hey,
ahead.
Dave.
No, I was just, I'll wait till all the questions because I made the first motion and Annette mentioned that whoever made the first motion, maybe we could revise it to include these recommendations that were approved at subcommittee 2. So I was wanting to do that before I log off, but go ahead, Dave.
Well,
As subcommittee chair, I just noticed something that I'd like to bring up. Paragraph 1, I thought we added refinement of screening process for that part into also number 2 and number 3, and I don't see it there. And didn't we do that?
Yeah, it's there. It says on the second line of number 2, it says including all refinements to the screening process.
I got it. It's just in a different place in the paragraph. Okay.
Yeah,
sorry.
It's worded a little bit differently.
Okay, I got it.
And one thing I'll mention also is that whenever we get to the approval of the tech memo, and I'll talk about how we're planning to modify the tech memo from what we've submitted based on this meeting and the actions that came out of it. That might be another option, is that we could just vote on the adoption of that tech memo with those refinements after we kind of go through that. And then, so if you want, we could vote on this now and then vote on the tech memo later. Up to you guys, however you want to do it.
I would recommend, through the chair, I would recommend that since our agenda does state that we will discuss with action as appropriate on the following items, as a result of the presentation that was made by AECOM under the general RFP updates from subcommittee 2, these recommendations have been made. which are the three that are on here on the screen. And so Sal, if you would want to make that motion. Oh, you're on mute, Sal.
So moved.
I'll second.
Okay, first and second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please indicate so by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion passes.
Thank you, guys, and I will see you next time. I'm going to log off, okay? Thank you.
Bye, Sal.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Got his done within 30 minutes. That's good.
Yeah.
It worked.
All right.
So,
Yeah, go ahead.
no, I was going to ask, I'm sure there's going to be more from AECOM.
Yeah, if we could go to the next slide, please. All right, I think with this, I'm handing it back to Brian, right?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. So the next few slides, this one just wanted to, we've discussed this a few times, but just to recap, the submittal for the technical memo will be submitted to TWDB by the January 7th. And then we're planning to have potentially the next two RFPG general meetings in January. This one may not be necessary depending on how today goes. So we might be able to schedule the next general meeting for late January or early February. Sooner the better, just in terms of the schedule. But we'll see everyone's availability for that. And then we'll have subcommittee meetings upcoming for subcommittee 3 that will happen just the week after the technical memo is submitted. And then we'll start to plan out the subcommittee 4 timeline as well, starting in February. So just briefly wanted to also share some observations and recommendations related to the updated Fathom data set. TWDB did post an updated data set a few weeks ago for which includes the 3-meter resolution Fathom data. So that the data set is quite large. There are 21 tiles in the region, and our region is the largest in the state. The flood event frequencies include 20%, 10%, 1%, and 0.2%. There's separate files for pluvial and fluvial, and ultimately what we found is it's going to take if we were to process the 3-meter data set region-wide, it would require between 44 to 126 different files to process, depending on which assumptions and runs we use. As I mentioned, the data set is quite large at the size of our region. I'm estimating there would be about 12.5 billion grid cells within that data set. And so it becomes very processor intensive, very time intensive. And we were finding that to utilize that 3-meter data set at the region-wide level would be cost prohibitive for the first cycle draft RFP. Now, with that being said, we do still have options in terms of how we can what data sets we can use for this first cycle. And we would like to utilize the 3-meter data set in areas where it would have the most impact, where there are active FMPs or identified FMPs, such as in Presidio and Fort Stockton. So we could utilize the more detailed 3-meter Fathom tiles there for refinement of the flood risk information. And then region-wide, we were going to recommend continuing to use the 30-meter Fathom data from July for the region-wide analysis. However, I wanted to also mention that the Fathom data from July only included the 1% and 0.1% are the 100-year and 1,000-year flood events. And for under task 2, we will be developing a flood risk layer for the 100-year and the 500-year. So for the 500-year, since that was not released in July as part of the 30-meter fathom data set, we were going to we're going to look into a potential option to interpolate between the 100-year and the 1,000-year floodplain fathom data, sort of kind of finding an average between those two boundaries and delineating that as our 500-year. Alternatively, we were also going to reach out to Aqua Strategies, who was on our team and who developed the cursory data for the development board with Fathom, and see if there may be a unreleased 500-year version of the 30-meter Fathom data that we could potentially use. So those are some options we were considering. And again, we would still utilize the 3-meter Fathom data where possible, but we would just prioritize specific areas as shown here, rather than trying to do it at a region-wide level. And then we could also propose an FME to include the complete processing of the region-wide 3-meter Fathom tiles, which would involve updating the flood risk and exposure layers. So those would be our recommendations. I don't know if anyone has any questions or comments at this time regarding that approach.
This is Delbert. I have a quick question. When you say interpolating between the 100-year and 1,000-year to, I guess, estimate the 500-year extent, have you guys thought about the methodology, or is it just right now in its infancy, just a thought?
So we would be using the raster calculations in GIS and subtracting the two rasters from one another and taking the average depth difference between the two. So it would involve, if the depth for the 100-year is 2 feet and the 1,000-year is 14 feet, then we would take an average between those two and get 8 feet depths. So at that particular location. So it would be processed at a region-wide level. It would not be a manual process.
Okay, I was just curious. Thank you.
Great. So another thing to point out too is that even though even with using the 3-meter Fathom data for specific areas, the more detailed data, we will still be recommending to use the FAFDS layer region-wide to combine with the Fathom data, because there are some areas where the FAFDS layer shows higher potential flood risk than is shown in Fathom. And again, the FAFDS is the old FEMA firm maps that were digitized and are considered a representation of those old regulatory maps. So in areas where there are where the FAFDS show flood risk and but the Fathom data set does not, we will still be using the FAFDS as a worst case scenario, as a most conservative approach. And so even utilizing the 3-meter Fathom data, even after doing that, the results in terms of structure impacts may be very similar to the structure impacts that we would find using the 30-meter Fathom data. And so just wanted to mention that ultimately, while task 2 will be identifying flood risk, we're also identifying structures impacted, and the actual structures impacted may not be changed significantly between the two versions of Fathom. So that's part of our justification for potentially using the 30-meter Fathom data region-wide.
Quick question. For other population centers that have experienced floods, such as Alpine and Sonora, why are we not looking at 3-meter data there as well? Is it because you have to evaluate the full square that you're showing on that map to be able to use that?
Right. So each grid will, if we select one area, we do have to look at the whole grid, or at least process, do some initial processing to download and convert the grid. So we could potentially include other tiles if that's desired. Our initial thinking behind selecting these 2 tiles was Presidio we talked about as a high flood risk area, and with some FMPs identified. Fort Stockton as well has some FMPs. So we were trying to focus on areas that have FMPs already identified, where that data set may be useful for evaluating the FMPs. But we can, if you'd like us to look at Alpine or other areas, we can also consider that.
I think your approach, where as FMPs come in, and that's where you increase your evaluation, I think it's fair. I think we need to prioritize our time. If the folks out in, for example, Alpine have not provided as many strategies or any at all, then we're gonna have to make adjustments. I know we might have to delay it until the next flood plan or whatnot.
Just as something to consider, and I agree that the strategies seems fair and appropriate, but for some of the communities in the Davis Mountains anyways, that I can speak to, they don't write up their FMPs. They just put a dozer in the stream and go at it. So, clearing out riparian vegetation to get the water to move faster, all these things are how people think out here, and they just go do it. So, one of the things I hope that this process does is sort of, I don't know, help some of these communities think longer term and more holistically.
So then it's on us as a flood planning group to make sure that we invite these folks out in the area and teach them or guide them in how to jot down their FMPs so that we can include them. I do think we have to make significant efforts to make more FMEs and FMPs in areas outside of El Paso County. And I know that the budget needs to be allocated fairly, but I really do think that when I look at the tech memo, I think we need to do much more. And I'm hoping that on our actual meetings out in Presidio and in Pecos, we get some traction.
All right, great feedback. Thank you. So with that, I'll turn it over to Chris for the discussion of the tech memo.
All right, thank you. You can go ahead to the next slide. So this is the outline for the tech memo. These are the basic sections that we included. We showed the political subdivisions, the flood studies that we've been considering, the flood-related H&H models, hydrology and hydraulic models that we've found to be available. We listed our flood mitigation, and floodplain management goals. We documented our process to identify FMEs, FMSs, and FMPs, and we listed the potential FMEs and potentially feasible FMSs and FMPs. We also noted that at this time there weren't any that had been determined by the RPG, any FMEs, FMSs, or FMPs to be infeasible. There are a couple refinements that I wanted to go over related to the tech memo and the last subcommittee 2 meeting that we had this week. So if I could just share my screen real quick, I could talk about what those refinements would be. So related to that subcommittee 2 meeting, we had said in this tech memo under section task 4 of the tech memo, in the header for process of identification of potentially feasible FMPs. So these are what we consider to be pretty minor changes, basically just updates based on meetings that have happened since this tech memo was released. So if anything, any changes to this process are considered clarifications or refinements. We're still working within the frame of the process that was identified in the memo. So one of the changes we're talking about making is in the next general RFPG meeting, this process will be presented for the RFPG to vote. Well, this process for identifying potentially feasible FMPs was already voted upon. So we would just be changing that language to, which was then voted upon by the subcommittee, presented to the RFPG, and approved by the RFPG. This next change, again, is pretty minor. At the time when we were editing or developing this tech memo, we were still pending a comparison. This is in context of developing the FMP scoring table for projects that are outside of the City of El Paso or El Paso County Stormwater Master Plans, which we talked about today. And in the last subcommittee 2 meeting, we hadn't come up with scores yet for each of these categories, and we hadn't compared each of the categories to the floodplain goals. So where we said pending a comparison of these lists to the finalized flood mitigation and flood management goals developed in Task 3, we would either just delete that or change that language to, I guess we could say, based on a comparison or based on a comparison of these. Yeah, so it'd say Subcommittee 2 has voted to recommend to the RPG the following 2 lists of project scoring categories based on a comparison of these lists to the finalized flood mitigation floodplain management goals developed in Task 3A and 3B of the RFP. And we could say these categories, instead of will each, these categories were assigned a range of potential scoring points, and then we can add on to this table what those scoring points were that we covered earlier in the meeting. And similarly, we would add on what the scoring points would be for each of these permit categories, depending on the complexity, which we also covered earlier in the meeting. We also, I forgot to mention that we refined this particular category. Instead of saying reduce flooding of real property, we changed it to just property in general. So that means, you know, if there's agricultural land or a property that doesn't have structure on it, we're also going to be considering that in this category. So that'd be another refinement to this list here. And lastly, you know, we talked about reducing the total number of FMPs based on the screening process that we went through with the subcommittee and individually with the stakeholders for City of El Paso and El Paso County. And so we are proposing to revise this bullet at the very end, where we say the list of potential FMEs, FMSs, FMPs are presented in these tables, A5, A6, and A7 respectively. However, these initial listings precede RPG actions, which will materially alter their final content. And first thing we mention here is that, you know, the FMEs that we came up with, the needs we came up with in one of the FME subcommittees, we still need to come out with the FMEs and FMSs that came from those needs. And this bullet is that the initial listing in table A7 of the FMPs in the Stormwater Master Plan for the City of El Paso and El Paso County was substantially reduced after review and screening by Subcommittee 2 to identify priority of projects for evaluation as part of the RFP. The reduced list of FMPs provided in tables blank and blank, which will be new tables that we present that show those 20 projects and 25 projects from the county, are prioritized to facilitate order of technical evaluation. And then we would present those tables of 25, and we could do the instead of 19 from the county, we can do 20, and we'll just put that first one at the bottom of the prioritized list. So any questions related to these changes that, you know, I still consider them to be minor or insubstantial, but I guess it's up to you all when you're voting on this adoption here, whether you're okay with us making these changes or if you need to have another review process. But any questions on any of those changes related to Subcommittee 2, the last Subcommittee 2 meeting?
Hey, this is Dave. Do we need any notation in there about the potential continued reduction by the city and the county that they're going to be working on in the next few days?
Since we haven't had an opportunity to present that in the Subcommittee 2 meetings, we weren't planning to include a reference to that at this point. See, we could add into this bullet here something along those lines.
It's in the minutes from the Tuesday meeting. So the fact that they're going to do some continued assessment of feasibility and has a potential of further reduction of the 25 to 19 for city and county respectively. I just, it wouldn't hurt for the tech memo to state that, I guess. And
right, that's a good point. You know, I can just modify this bullet on the fly right here and say the city and the county of El Paso will have the opportunity to revise these lists moving forward. In addition, AECOM will have the opportunity to evaluate the time and budget needed to evaluate, I'll have to reword that, the reduced list, the list of projects, to reduce them further as needed. Something along those lines. We can kind of wordsmith it, but I think that's a good point. We can add something to that effect.
And one other question.
Okay.
Yeah. Another question. How do we this is just a kind of a side question, and I don't know if it needs to be in the tech memo or not, but once you guys see the lists and determine how many items are on the list, and then you assess what's feasible for further development, how are you going to determine what percentage of the city, the county, and other projects are brought forward for further assessment?
Budget-wise, right?
Yeah, based on your budget, right?
Right. So now that we have these reduced lists of stormwater master plan projects, you know, we're going to have to look at these compared to the total number of projects outside of the region, which, you know, we had some comments during the Subcommittee 2 meeting. I think it was Dave that brought up that, you know, we would like to evaluate as many of the projects outside of the city and county master plans as we can, so that we can, you know, show equality throughout the region. So that's something that we'll be considering, but we're also still collecting information on some of these other projects. So depending on whether the necessary information to evaluate these projects becomes available, you know, that will affect which ones we do. But this is sort of a good start now. We have a manageable number of projects within the city and county master plans, and we have about 9 projects outside of the city and county that we're considering. So From here, we're just going to have to look at how much time's available and how complex is it to model each of these scenarios to get the information that we need. And that's going to take just some time in sort of a case-by-case basis. And we would be presenting that at future subcommittee meetings to discuss, okay, here's the next subcommittee 2 meeting, for example, we're going to discuss how many of the projects we think we can do based on the time and budget. So it's really just a case-by-case basis, depending on the complexity and the information available.
Okay, I'll look forward to that at the next subcommittee 2 meeting.
Any other questions? All right, with that, I'll just hand it back to Brian. I think he was going to go over just a few other minor edits that could be made to the tech memo compared to the version that you all already reviewed.
Mr. Irving wanted to also speak. He has his hand up.
I just had a quick comment to Dave's question. The short answer to Dave's question is the decision on which ones we evaluate will be determined in discussion, open discussion, workshop type fashion with the subcommittee. So we're not going to proceed with assuming that we're approved to evaluate anything until we get that approval from the subcommittee. It's clear there are opinions on which ones we should be doing, and we will solicit that before we make any decision on what we do.
Thanks, I understand that. Thank you.
All right.
All right,
You
so
go ahead,
I'll
Brian.
finish summarizing here, and the geodatabase is also, there's a few minor changes that we have planned for that. Those are listed out in the email that was sent originally with the draft document. We are going to potentially, we need to confirm this with the development board, whether to include unincorporated areas in the entities layer. Currently, it only includes the incorporated areas. And then for the existing flood projects layer, we did move several projects that were identified from the F&P table as have already been either assigned committed funding or currently under construction. Those were removed from the F&Ps and moved to the existing flood projects table. There are, I believe there are a couple projects that are actually in both tables where they may have passed a certain design milestone, but are not like, they may potentially have funding, but not fully committed funding. So in that case, it may kind of fall under both of the tables. So we'll be looking at that, and the change has already been made to the geodatabase, but we'll make sure that the tech memo is consistent with that. So and then the slides here just differentiate between, there are still some layers not included in the geodatabase that will be developed for the March 2022 deadline, which includes the flood hazard, flood exposure, and gaps data. And those are part of the extended deadline deliverables. So before we move into a discussion and action to vote on the technical memo on submitting that, I did want to also mention that we have a link to a survey that I'll post in the chat. And this survey is intended for the general public and other stakeholders that want to provide feedback. If anyone on the planning group would like to also complete that survey, feel free, but this survey was mainly intended for all those that were not able to attend today's meeting. So this would include, or this would allow the public a chance to review and provide any comments between now and the time that it's submitted in January. So this, we'll be sending this out to, to Jeff Bennett's question. This would go out to all counties that are on our stakeholder email list.
Are there some counties that did not respond and so therefore are not on that list?
That's a good question.
I believe all the counties are on the list now. Whether or not, I know Gilbert and Duho, when we send out those stakeholder emails, you do receive some notifications that some stakeholders are deleting the emails or reading them. Can you speak just generally to that?
Yeah, I've got it on to where I get whenever they delete it without reading or they read it and when it's delivered. So a lot of the times we get deleted without being read, and or they'll read it, they won't respond. So
Thank you. Maybe at some point we could come up with a list of counties that aren't responding and paying attention. I just think maybe some local lobbying might be necessary.
right, and I think we have that list built in there, so we can work on that.
Thank you.
Yeah, Levi Bryan over here at LCA may be able to help with some of those counties or, smaller towns, municipalities that we've worked with in the past. If they're not responding, the list might be helpful and might be able to help out with that as well.
Field trip to the region.
Thanks, Levi.
All right, so with that, I guess I'll turn it over to Ned if we would like to take an action to vote on this, or also if anyone has any general questions, comments that have not already been discussed pertaining to the technical memo or the geodatabase.
Well, through the chair, as you can see, we do have the proposed action item. And just as a reminder, the action item would be the adoption of the technical memo as presented by AECOM with the authorization of the consultant political subdivision to make non-substantial edits in submittal of the final tech memo to the Texas Water Development Board. So through the chair, we can, if anyone would like to make a motion for approval.
So moved.
Jeff.
Second.
Is that Gilbert?
Yes.
Okay.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please indicate so by saying aye.
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 Any opposed?
Aye.
Okay, motion passes. Thank you.
We all are very
All
quiet.
right.
Francis's event happened. You guys are just too tired, right?
I will say that I did read the memo and it meets all of the TWB's criteria from my understanding. And so AECOM had less than a year to put this together and I think they've done a superb job. So I'm pretty happy with it.
Thank you, Omar.
Thank you. Yeah, we were cheering. I was just on mute.
Okay. Yeah, next.
I mean, just to put it into context for everyone, like this is, in my eyes, the first of the three big events for you all. You guys will submitting the tech memo, submitting the draft plan, and then eventually adopting it, and then submitting the amended plan now with the additional funding. Like those are like the three big new content events that you guys have. So congrats.
I don't envy the Water Development Board at all about having to review all these, and then that's a nightmare.
Yep, that's going to be our January.
Oh, kidding. Just January?
Yeah, our contract says within 30 days we have to respond. So yes.
Wow. Okay.
Okay, so item number 11 from AECOM as well, discussion of TWDB responses to AECOM's questions regarding levies.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll just go over this briefly. I know we're trying to get out of here for the holidays, and so I'll just mention that we did have a list of questions that we submitted to the Texas Water Development Board, and we received responses. These questions had to do with methods related to evaluating levees along the border, and these issues that I'll kind of go over here in a second. But we got responses from them, from TWDB, on the 16th of November. We had 2 meetings with the TWDB to discuss those responses, and USIBWC was present, as well as representatives from this regional flood planning group and AECOM and TWDB. So some of the issues that we discussed in the questions and responses were for projects or plans located out of the state or out of the country. We were basically asking if a project was in a state other than Texas or a country other than the United States, such as Mexico, would that be an acceptable project to include in the RFP or to recommend? And the response was yes. The TWDB understands that flooding from the state is affected by areas outside of the state and outside of the country. However, there was a caveat that we should be cautious about how much effort we spend evaluating some of those projects, because it's not set in stone whether future funding opportunities would fund projects that are out of the state or out of the country. So we don't want to spend too much time in budget evaluating those in case those future funding opportunities don't fund them, but they are acceptable. We also talked about the interpretation of provisionally accredited dams or levees, and we were told that for dams, there is not an accreditation list anywhere, that basically the statement in the scope and the guidance referring to accredited dams can be ignored, and they're really just talking about accredited levees. And provisionally accredited levees would be something that was at one point accredited already by FEMA, and there is a definition of provisionally accredited levees by FEMA, and any clarifications we have on that definition we would have to get from FEMA, basically, if there was a question about whether one was or not. It doesn't look like that's really going to be an issue. We were just asking because we know that certification packages have been submitted for some of the levees in the region, and so we just wanted to be clear about what was considered provisionally accredited. The methods for modeling overtopped levees, whether to consider them breached or whether to just assume that they would not fail and that flow overtops them, was another question. And we were told that it's basically up to the engineer's judgment on how we think is the most appropriate way to model them. However, it was recommended to be more on the conservative side, which would assume breaching, that a levee breaches. So that was the guidance we received there. For modeling levees on the Mexican side of the border, again, we were told it's up to the engineer's judgment. However, they would lean more on the side of the conservative scenario, which would essentially assume that the Mexican levees are there and potentially raised to the same elevation as the American side in locations where they might be a little bit lower. So that's the guidance we were given on that scenario. References to international levy agreements with Mexico, we talked about. There are some agreements which discuss how Mexico is maintaining the levies versus the US IBWC maintaining the levies. And also there are water rights agreements concerning the Rio Grande, which are pretty complex, and you need to track down that information for some of the projects that might get proposed in this regional flood plan. And basically we were suggesting, whether we could reference that those agreements exist and they would need to be dealt with in order for certain projects to take place. Or the question was, whether we needed to go into detail of those agreements and define exactly what needs to get replaced. And we were told that our more high-level approach of sort of referencing these agreements exist and they would need to be dealt with accordingly was an acceptable approach. And lastly, where we referenced FMPs with dedicated funding, we weren't sure, if those should be evaluated again, if there's already funding available as part of this plan, whether we need to go through the process of evaluating those. And we were told that no, those would go on this list of existing or ongoing projects, and we could just use any sort of BCR data that was previously developed for those, that wouldn't need to undergo the same level of evaluation as some of these other FMPs that don't yet have dedicated funding. So that's kind of a high-level overview of what was discussed. However, there is a document that has the responses that the TWDB submitted to us, which was attached to the agenda. So if you want to go through the details of that, you're welcome to do that. It's all posted on the regional RFP website. So that's all I have. Are there any questions? All right. Well, that's all that we have to present. So, thank you all again for your time. And we know that it's been very intensive. Some of these meetings, there's been a lot of them, and they've been very long. And we really appreciate all of your all's time and input during these meetings. And so we just
can
say happy holidays and thanks again.
Thank you. Great work.
So, through the chair, in terms of setting our next meeting date, I know you all had that as an agenda item, or you had that in your presentation. Can we go over that again one more time, just to see from the group right now what time frame would be ideal?
I think AECOM needs to tell us when they need it.
Right. Brian, do you want to handle this one, or do you want me to talk about it?
Sure. So we talked about sometime in January holding our next RPG meeting. Given our vote for approval to submit with non-substantial changes, we can likely wait until after that submittal date to have our next RPG meeting. So that means, and then we have a subcommittee 3 meeting on the 10th. In January, February, we will be continuing to, we'll be picking up the momentum again and making progress on the project development, and hopefully start evaluating projects as soon as possible. So I think if we can, if the planning group is okay with it, we can try to shoot for the week of the 17th or the 24th.
Oh, Dave won't be in.
We've got we've got a subcommittee 2 meeting on the week of the 17th. Hopefully we can do that on the 18th, but we haven't determined that yet.
We haven't determined yet. I don't think that's been determined yet, Dave.
No, it hasn't. That's why I said that hadn't been determined yet.
Right, and we had a subcommittee 3 meeting planned for the week before that, for the 10th through the 14th. Do we know, Annette, have we already gotten or sent out a doodle poll for that one, or do you know if we've gotten the feedback on that yet?
I'm going to review, but I'm going to say I did not send that out yet, so I'll send them both out today. So what we're saying is that we need to send out a doodle for subcommittee 3
For the 10th.
for the week of the 10th, week of January 10th, and then I need to do subcommittee for the week of the 17th. And then, so after those 2 are accomplished, we're still uncertain on when to meet for the
Regular.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think if we wanted to just keep 1 meeting per week, we could propose that the next general RPG meeting go for the week of the 24th through the 27th.
Okay, 24th to the 27th.
Sure.
So January 24th through the 27th.
For general?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Do you all want to, so we haven't really set a standard date to meet for the flood planning groups meetings. Do we want to, so I'll just send out a doodle poll for that one also to check on availability. Is that okay?
It's for the week of the 24th?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Okay, I see.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Do that. Okay, thank you so much.
So it's potentially the week of 24 through 28.
So then we just have adjourned.
Okay, thank you. And moving on to item number 12.
13.
I'm sorry, 13. Adjourning meeting. Can I entertain a motion?
So moved.
Jeff, a second, please.
I'll second.
Okay, Dave, the first and a second. All in favor, please indicate so by saying aye.
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 Merry Christmas.
Any opposed? Okay, hearing none, motion passes. Thank you, everybody. Have a happy holidays.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Happy holidays.
Yeah.
Thank
Happy
you.
holidays.
Good work, everybody.
Thank you.
Happy holidays.
Thank you.